Re-piercing and reclaiming old piercings that have been abandoned. Coming up next on Body Piercing Basics, episode number 60. So you should stick around. For those that are new to the channel, my name is DaVo. I'm a professional body piercer and have been since 1994. I own and operate the Axiom Body Piercing Studio located here in Des Moines, Iowa, inside the lovely Skin Kitchen. So, when I talk to you about these things, I'm talking to you with a level of expertise as someone who has pierced professionally for well over 25 years. Today's topic comes from one of our viewers. They asked if I could do a video talking about re-piercing or reclaiming old abandoned piercings. This is a subject that comes up from time to time. I've done this quite a few times, and it kind of is one of those things that a lot of people are curious about, partly because piercings, they kind of become a part of your life. They're a part of you. They're like a loved one almost, and lifestyle changes and all kinds of other things will cause you to have to remove the jewelry. And then a couple years go by and maybe you're in a different situation where you can have the piercing now and it feels really strange to continue life without it. So you have it re-pierced, or you at least try to put a new piece of jewelry in there to see if it's still open. So, the other reasons why you may have taken jewelry out and abandoned a piercing could include, and it's a little bit more complicated with that, is situations where there were issues. Things like rejection, where your body completely rejected the jewelry. Migration, where it partially rejected it. Or there was trauma to the piercing, where it got caught or snagged or teared, and it totally shifted shifted the placement of the piercing. The other thing is if there was issues, like the piercing was done incorrectly or with the incorrect jewelry, and this caused bumps or problems where the jewelry had to be removed for the problem to go away. So what's the difference between re-piercing and reclaiming? Re-piercing is where we physically re-pierce it. Simple. You're just going through the whole same procedure all over again. Reclaiming is where we use something like a taper pin to reopen the piercing, or at least stretch it to the point where we can get jewelry back in. So I'm going to start out by talking about reclaiming. Reclaiming, there are certain piercings that are more prone to this or more acceptable to this than other ones. The first thing is that when you remove the jewelry, was the piercing healthy without any issues? If that's the case, then yes, that's a gold star in that category to reclaim. The next one being is if it's located in a part of the body that is notorious for staying open longer than other piercings. For example, if it's a piercing that is in the mouth where oral piercings do close very, very rapidly, it's going to be less of a likelihood that it's going to be able to be reclaimed as per se a nostril piercing or a septum piercing, which may stay open slightly longer. This is one of the reasons why if you do have a situation where you lose jewelry, getting to your piercer and having them try to get the jewelry back in as soon as possible, regardless of what period of time you are in that healing process and everything else, is a good idea. Sometimes we can get the jewelry back in even when it's been out a day or two. So always check with your piercer before you completely give up. The other thing is how well healed it is. Basically how long it was in the body. If it was in there longer, of course, there's more thicker tissue produced, and it's going to be harder for your body to actually close it. The other thing would be is how thick the gauge was or the thickness of the jewelry. The bigger the hole, of course, the longer it's going to take for your body to close it completely. Often, piercings will appear open on the outside with almost a deep crevice where it looks like they're completely open. And then when you try to stick that old jewelry in there, it gets about halfway to maybe 3/8 to halfway through and stops. And one of the reasons why that is how your body heals piercings when you abandon them. Your body heals in piercings by shrinking down that center tissue and then slowly filling up the tissue outward. Sometimes it hasn't completely shrank it all the way down. And the only way to know that is to use a taper pin. For those who are not familiar with a taper pin is a piece of metal anywhere from roughly about an inch and a half to 3-4 inches, where one side is ultra thin and the other side is the thickness that you want. For example, a 14 gauge taper pin would be 14 on one side, and the other side would be probably close to 22 or 18 gauge or 19 gauge. So it slowly thickens. The reason why this is a huge tool with reclaiming is we can insert it and tell whether or not that tissue is completely connected in the center. If it isn't, we can usually kind of slide it through there, get it out to the other side, and then slowly stretch or expand the piercing so that you can get that jewelry back in, thus reclaiming the piercing. As far as healing reclaimed piercings or anything like that, sometimes there might be a little bit of bleeding, a little bit of dislodging of tissue. So it's always a good idea to kind of treat it like a healing piercing for at least a couple of weeks to a couple months, just to be on the safe side. Do those soaks, practice that safe cross-contamination prevention, and keep an eye on it. Is it going to be as intense as rehealing the whole piercing? No. The other advantage of the compresses is they it tends to help loosen up that tissue and make it more pliable and easier for it to expand. It gives your body that an added little bonus of minerals and et cetera to kind of get things kick-started with the healing process. Because even though you're not healing the piercing completely, you are producing tissue to expand. So now let's talk about candidates for re-piercing. If, for example, you had a piercing, you removed the jewelry, there was no issues, no signs of migration, no bumps, no infection, nothing, usually re-piercing it is not going to be any issue at all. Often we can go in exactly the same spot to reduce the amount of scar tissue you see. It is going to probably take the same amount of time to heal over again as it did the first time. I know you might be thinking, oh, there's only this little part in the center that you're actually piercing. The reality is the whole trauma and the effect of the piercing can often dislodge what is even left there of the old piercing. So you have to go through the whole healing process again. Sorry. The only advantage is on certain piercings where there's a lot of adaptation, like let's say a tongue piercing, you may not have to deal with as much of that adaptation. For example, it's going to be a little easier to eat than it was the first time around. It's not going to be as much of a pain as it was to get used to having that piercing around. The other thing with other piercings, especially if it affected sleep, is you've already kind of learned those habits, so it makes it a little bit easier. Now, re-piercing piercings that had issues. Let's start with rejection, migration, and trauma, where it's been torn or the body has tried to push it out or it has completely rejected it. With those, you really have to wait a long period of time to get to the point where that tissue is generated back to as normal as it can tissue. The reason being is that if we go in there and pierce generally right behind it or right in that same area, is because of that softer scar tissue. Often, especially if you're already prone to rejection or migration, it will push right through into that softer tissue and migrate right out again. The longer you wait, the better off you're going to be. I know a lot of people will say, well, we'll just pierce behind where the other piercing was. Well, that's not always an option. Some piercings, there's just not enough space back there, and doing it deeper is going to cause issues. And chances are is it's still going to try to push to that point where it can reject it or migrate it. So waiting 2, 3, 4 years before you attempt to redo a piercing that is migrated, torn, or rejected is not a bad idea. It should get to the point where you can almost not tell the difference between the area where it migrated through in that normal tissue of that particular part of the body. Now let's talk about piercings that were done incorrectly, things that cause abscesses, cysts, bumps, etc. Scarring. I guess abscess and cysts, that's a sign of infection. Here's the number one thing. Did the bump or problem go away? If it did not go away, and if it doesn't go away within a month or 2 weeks to a month after you remove the jewelry, you need to seek medical attention. It could be something a little bit more severe or more traumatic than what you thought it was, meaning it could be a cyst or an abscess, which means it needs medical care to be either lanced and drained or removed. Don't do it yourself. Popping abscesses and cysts on your body is not a good idea. You can always introduce it into your bloodstream, and then it can turn septic and possibly, if left alone long enough, kill you, or at least make you end up in the hospital. So it's very important that those bumps have completely cleared up. If there was obsessive scar tissue, that the scar tissue has gone away and it's gotten back to the point where it's almost normal with maybe an indentation scar where the piercing was. At that point, it shouldn't be an issue to re-pierce it. I strongly advise that you mention the issues that you had in the past to basically make sure that your piercer doesn't repeat the same mistakes that the first one did. The other thing is often the piercing will be shifted or moved and not through the exact same spot, so you are going to have a little bit of additional scar tissue. Is it going to be overly noticeable? Probably not, but you do need to take that into account when you're going in and getting it done. Now, when we re-pierce something, it is going to be prone to a few things. The first one is going to be probably prone to being a little bit more sensitive than it was the first time around. And the reason being is that scar tissue tends to be a little bit more sensitive. That's not always the case, but in some cases, yes, it can be a little bit more uncomfortable than you remember it being. Plus, the passage of time, you don't remember how the piercing felt the first time anyway. The second thing is that it may bleed more. And the reason for that is by piercing it, you have kind of changed the structure of that part of your body. Blood vessels have moved and kind of shifted around. And often, sometimes during the rehealing process or the closure process, it will actually grow blood vessels back through the area. So sometimes we see a little bit more bleeding that second time around than maybe you saw the first time. The healing should be exactly the same as it was the first time. You may have... I don't think it's going to be any quicker or any slower. It should be about the same. If you had issues with the piercing in the past, of course, I would be due diligent about checking it on a regular basis. And as soon as anything crops up, contacting your piercer as soon as possible to try to get on top of what is causing it and get that removed so things get back to normal. With re-piercing, and I've talked about this again, but I need to kind of revive this and just make sure this is clear. When re-piercing, piercings that are rejected or torn or been ripped out of the body, you really have to be diligent about paying attention to the location of the piercing. The minute you start seeing migration one way or another, it's probably a good idea to remove the jewelry to avoid further scarring. If you can, sometimes they won't do this, but sometimes they do. Just keep an eye on it. It is going to be more prone to rejection. You should know that going in and understand that this may be an issue. Hopefully, you give it enough time, it's produced enough thick tissue that it's not going to cause a problem. So I'm going to finish out with some of the most common questions I get asked when someone comes in and asks to re-pierce something. The first one being is, can you do it in the same spot? Yes and no. If the piercing healed out perfectly fine, there was no issues, no problems, no migration, no rejection, it just needs to be redone, often, yes, we can get to exactly the same spot. That is, as long as the placement matches your anatomy and is going to work, in my opinion, well with that anatomy. We will try to do it through that old scar tissue just to limit the amount of trauma to the area and the amount of scar tissue that you're going to see. The second one being, will it cause more scarring? Possibly. Another yes or no answer. Of course, if we're doing it behind an old piercing that migrated or rejected, or maybe in a different position for a piercing that had issues, then yeah, there's going to be a little bit more scar tissue. Is it going to be overly noticeable? Probably not, depending on how well that initial piercing healed. With like navel piercings, I would often try to do it in a way that it would kind of distract from any old mark or piercing scars, to kind of make it look better and enhance it and improve it. Talk to your piercer about this and mention that you're a little worried about additional scarring, and try to adapt. They will often try to adapt to kind of draw attention away from it and make things look good again. The next one, can't you just pierce that little tiny part in the center that went shut? Yes and no. For the third time. Yes, and I kind of covered this earlier. Yes, we can put that needle exactly through that same spot, but we're putting a sharp object through something made of soft tissue. It's probably going to cut it, and it's probably going to dislodge it. So it's basically the same as re-piercing all over again. So you should be prepared for that. Also, it's not uncommon when you redo an old piercing that the jewel, that once you get done with it, it's almost like that old piercing comes out and kind of hangs off like a hangnail immediately after. Like it just completely dislodges when you do it exactly through. So yes, we can, but it's probably not practical and it's probably not going to work. And lastly, will re-piercing produce a shorter healing time? I already kind of addressed this before, but let's address it again. No. It's still going to take just as long to heal, regardless of we're piercing a millimeter or a full piercing. Just because that scar tissue might be there and part of that piercing might be there, it might seem a little shorter, it might not be as traumatic, but it's my experience, piercings take just as long to heal the second time around as they did the first time. So that's everything I have to say on this subject today. It was a bit long-winded, and I hope you learned something. If you did, then give me a thumbs up. Let me know that you liked it, because I like it when you like it. If you have something to add to the conversation or you feel like I missed something, hey, that's what the comment section's for. Go ahead and make a comment. I usually answer them when I have time. I love to answer questions. Also, I love it when people share information. It's part of what we're trying to do here is kind of build a community where people share ideas and information, as long as it's good information. If you haven't subscribed already, why? We post roughly 4 to 5 videos a week with a focus on education, on tattooing and body piercing. Hit that notification bell so that you're notified every single time we post something. If you're a stylish individual that likes swag and likes body art, tattoos and piercings, check out our merch store. Links in the description. Also, there's things down there that's called the merch shelf, right below some examples of some of the t-shirts that we have to offer and some of the products. So check that out. Buy you something special and make yourself feel a little better. I don't know. Buying new stuff and new clothes always makes me feel good. I'm weird that way. Anyway, here's hoping all your piercings heal with ease and without a single issue. And if you're in the Des Moines, Iowa area, I hope to see you for your body piercing needs in the future. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you for watching. Hopefully it's warmed up in your part of the world and you've gotten to go out and enjoy the sunshine. I did yesterday, and I feel 100 times better. So go out there, do some hiking, see something you ain't seen in a while, and, take a picture of it or take a picture next to it. Have fun, everybody.